So the feeling of shame is coming from a consciousness or an awareness that we have done something wrong according to a specific moral code that might not even be ours. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Shame is a topic I'm honestly excited to talk about. Is that weird? It's probably weird. Well, hopefully shame will have a different connotation for you as well after this podcast today, because we're going to take on any of those shame demons you have in your closet. We're going to break them down. We're going to dissect them so they don't need to feel so scary anymore. I think shame is something that really hinders people in ways they don't even recognize. It's like that silent killer of joy and progress. Shame slows people down. It prevents people from putting themselves out there, and it really just steals so much happiness from everyday life. I actually did a post about this topic on my personal social media last year, and it was really interesting because I got responses from people that really surprised me. And I knew when I started this podcast that shame was definitely going to be a topic I wanted to talk about, that I wanted to cover in a variety of ways. But today we are just going to start from the core of what is shame and why do we have it. And I just love talking about shame. And I think partially because, from my perspective, it's a little bit unique. I'm someone that obviously has worked in social work for a really long time. And so I have walked very closely with people through really challenging life circumstances. And in many of those circumstances, shame was a huge part of their life, whether that was because of their current circumstance causing them to feel shame or something in the past causing them to feel shame. And when you're in really challenging life experiences, a lot of those feelings really come to the surface and you have to deal with them head on. And I don't know, I think it's really helped me to see shame in a different way and be able to having seen so many different experiences, be able to really look at it from a different perspective. And I'm excited to share a bit about that with you guys today. The thing is that everyone experiences shame at some point in life. It's an emotion, it's a feeling. And the cool thing about learning about your brains and the emotions that you have, like shame, is when you really break it down and see how the brain works and why we have those emotions and why those emotions come from certain thoughts that we're having, certain beliefs that we have, those emotions can start to feel a little bit less scary because you can see why the brain is sending you that message. You can realize why you're having that thought or why you're forming that belief. And it's like you almost recognize, well, my brain is just a machine. You put something in and you get something out. And then those feelings can feel less overwhelming because you're just observing the process that your brain is doing. Like, think about toast, for example. When you're making toast, you take bread, regular bread that's soft, and you put it in a toaster and it's under this like heating element that browns the outer layer. And when it comes out, you have toast. And it's like the outer lower layer is a little burnt and crunchy, right? But we don't look at that and go like, "Oh my gosh, what happened to my bread? It's toasted now. Like the outside is hard. Why did it get hard? What happened to my toast? It's totally different than when it went in. It was soft when it went in." But the same applies with our brains when we figure out how they work. Like, okay, that experience happened. My brain took in that information and processed it, and then it came out with this result. And now you can track how it got to where it is now and why you're having that emotion. And then emotion feels a little bit less scary and overwhelming, right? So, with that being said, let's break down the actual emotion of shame together today. So, what is shame? According to Merriam-Webster, the definition says shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. I'm going to read that again for you. Shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. Okay, so let's try and hold on to that because that definition is going to come into play a little bit later. So let's look at the difference between, say, embarrassment versus shame. So, embarrassment is almost the temporary version of shame. We can feel embarrassment about an action or a situation that we're in. When something happens that we feel uncomfortable with, but that temporary thing can become permanent, and that's where shame comes into play. And shame is when we start associating that temporary thing with our identity, that we are something, not just that we did something, right? Shame happens when we take that action or that situation that we were embarrassed by, and now it's internalized, and it actually impacts how we see our worth as a human, our core identity. So if we break it down, it's when I did something moves to I actually believe I am that thing. So if I did something bad, now I am bad. Basically, we're believing that we are the sum of those bad things we did. And sometimes that happens just based off of one incident where we felt a very intense embarrassment. Or it could be many experiences that were repeated of that embarrassment that all put together are a strong enough belief in our brains that we begin to let it define us. And man, is that a terrifying place to be or what? That feeling that we are bad for some reason can be debilitating. It makes us want to hide, and it can impact all areas of our life and how we show up in the world. The other issue is that once we feel we are bad, we pretty much hit our limit for that embarrassment or ashamed feeling. So, what that means is that we're going to try and avoid any other situation in life where we would get hit with a fresh sense of embarrassment again, because we don't have any more capacity for that feeling. Like, once our identity is associated with something negative, our cup, our capacity is just basically full. So that if we have like another little experience of embarrassment, it makes that cup completely overflow because we don't have any more capacity to handle that emotion. Whereas if you look at it from the opposite perspective, say you're someone that's like super confident, you have amazing self worth, and you try something new or different and you experience a little bit of embarrassment, well, it's like a tiny drop in a cup, and you have plenty of space for that. It barely makes an impact. So you can just process it fine, keep moving on, and it doesn't have to define you, and it doesn't make you feel completely overwhelmed. It's like it's uncomfortable in that moment, but it's not overwhelming, which can really help you see why people who struggle with shame just stop engaging. They stop engaging in any activity that could cause them to feel embarrassed, and really, what that does is it just prevents so much joy and growth and so much meaning to be taken from life. Because part of what life is having those experiences where you put yourself out there and you try something new or you put a new idea out in the world. And when that's not happening, you're not able to fulfill what you're probably called to because that just inherently requires that risk, right? Shame slows us down from so many good parts of life. Okay, so now we understand a bit about shame, but let's circle back to the definition again. If you read the ending of that definition, it says that this feeling is caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. So we are feeling this emotion because of our awareness of wrong or foolish behavior. But who is defining wrong or foolish? Well, that depends. It can be different in many situations. Not only can the moral code vary, but also who defines the moral code. So, what is wrong or foolish can look drastically different based on who you are, your background, where you are, the time period you're living in, so many different things. It's a completely biased perspective. It's not based in fact at all. So the feeling of shame is coming from a consciousness or an awareness that we've done something wrong according to a specific moral code that might not even be ours. So one thing could be embarrassing or shameful in our world, but not in someone else's world. So that is point number one. That feeling you are experiencing is completely coming from what you're exposed to around you. It's an awareness that your actions don't align with whatever moral code or moral norms that you are exposed to. And remember, shame is when it's associated with our identity, which means your identity is being generated from some external norm or moral code, which is kind of crazy. I feel like I might need to start do some cheerleading chants here or put it on a t-shirt, but think about this. Do we let external things define us? No, we don't. That needs to be our chant. But really, are you buying into a belief system that is not yours? Because if you are, well, that's just silly. But also, if you think about it, if you're defining yourself based off of someone else's beliefs, but also you really zoom out and think about it on a like global level, what if you got transplanted to the other side of the planet or even a whole different time period? Would that thing that you're ashamed of still feel the same way if you were surrounded by a people or a culture or a time period that didn't think that was a problem at all? Well, no. So why would you let that define who you are just because your culture, your background, someone else's belief system that you're currently living surrounded by says that it's something you should be ashamed of? Not only that, but as humans, we also like to catastrophize our own shame. Like whatever you are ashamed of feels way worse than anyone else's, right? And that's a huge part of the problem. No one's like out here talking all the time openly about their own shame, right? Everyone likes to kind of keep it hidden, and that really just perpetuates it because then no one really knows what anyone else is struggling with, and it's easy to get in your brain about it and just be like, well, mine is way worse because I don't know what anyone else's looks like. So clearly mine's the worst, right? And our brains do that. They look for evidence of what we believe. So if you believe that what you've done is absolutely horrible, you're just going to continue to look for things that reinforce that, especially if you don't have inputs coming in that challenge that perspective. So what I like to ask people is, would someone else look at what you're ashamed of and laugh because it's nothing compared to what they've done or what they're ashamed of? The answer is often yes. I would almost venture to say it's always yes. There is always going to be someone who would consider their shame way worse than yours. I want to say that again. There is going to be someone who considers their shame way worse than yours. Now, as someone who has worked with some people who are honestly looked at by society as the scum of the earth, they've committed horrible crimes and sometimes multiple times. I can tell you, I can still go through this exercise even with them, and it still holds up. There will always be someone who sees their shame as worse than yours. So if we are feeling shame based on completely varying perspectives, why in the world are we letting that define us? Another thing to consider is we often feel embarrassed or ashamed because of something that we did that, without the context, could be judged by society much more harshly. But that's because we're leaving out the context. If you include the context of your life experiences, it completely changes how quote unquote bad that would be viewed. For example, when you look at people who have committed certain crimes and you can't understand how a person could ever do such a thing, but then you take it from my perspective as someone working with those people, and I know their story, I know what they've been through, I know the trauma that their brains have experienced, you realize that they themselves have been victim to a variety of things in their own lives. And really, they are simply doing the best that they can with the cards that they've been dealt. And I know that can be hard for some people to hear, but truly, when you get down to the core of who someone is and everything that they've experienced, it really makes their actions look different. We are all humans having a human experience on this planet. The whole point of that experience is to grow and learn. And the only way we grow and learn is by trial and error. Lots of trial and error. But those errors do not have to define us. In fact, if you take this to the complete other extreme, the other end of the continuum, I've even seen cases where someone has shame about something that, according to their upbringing or their culture, is a really, really bad thing. Like the worst thing you could do. But if you zoom out Or again, if you transplant them, if you look at it from a different lens, this thing is actually a really, really good thing. And that's how horrible shame can be. There are times where we have shame about something that is actually a gift that we were meant to bring to this planet. It's part of our calling. And in fact, because of whatever temporary situation we're in, we are thinking it's a bad thing. And so we prevent bringing that to the world. How sad is that? That an amazing thing for this world could be kept hidden because we are told to be ashamed of it. So if we can step back and realize that our definition of what should be embarrassing or shameful is so shaky, we are feeling first an emotion of an embarrassment based on varying moral codes or ideas of what is normal. And then somehow we're deciding that that feeling has happened enough times or intensely enough that now we're going to believe that that feeling should define us. Man, does that sound a little silly? So maybe we don't have to judge ourselves so harshly. And if we also realize that those sensations of embarrassment that happen in our bodies are truly just a natural result of taking an action that doesn't align with what we're surrounded by, maybe that sensation really doesn't have to have so much meaning. And those feelings don't have to define us. Maybe we don't need to let the embarrassment start to embed in our identity, but we can kind of pump the brakes and believe something different. I know that if you're listening to this, you might be telling yourself, well, wait a second. My shame is different. And I'd like to affirm you in that. Yes, your shame probably is different. It might be different than some, but it's not the worst. And in fact, some people might not even see it as a bad thing. And if that were the truth, would you think differently about yourself? Would you feel differently about yourself? I sure hope so. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This feeling of shame is so powerful, but it's also powerful when you realize you're just buying into a belief that might not even be yours. So maybe you don't need to let that belief slow you down from experiencing all that life has to offer. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.